All right, folks, welcome to the Gritty Podcast. I am your host, Brian Call, and today my co-host is my brother, the Gritty Broman. How are you, Brent?
I'm well. Thank you.
All right, we are now into the next part of the River of Doubt, which we don't know what number part this is, so it's the next part. And we're reading from the book, The River of Doubt, Theodore Roosevelt's Darkest Journey by Candace Millard, and it's about Theodore Roosevelt's and his son Kermit, his journey through the Amazon on an uncharted river. I think he's in his 50s. After he didn't win re-election for the presidency of the United States, he goes into the jungle and decides to do a wild, dangerous,
ill-advised,
a horrible journey. Okay, so we're deep into this. We left off last time with an ominous cliffhanger, talking about how they had been portaging. They have these big log dugout canoes, which are just a log that are hewn out in the middle and they float. Pretty crude.
They're a hollowed out tree.
Yeah, and they're floating in that with all their provisions and their stuff down this sketchy river in the Amazon.
Or the lack thereof.
And they've got to make it to the ocean, or at least, or someplace where they can, get to the end of this. The only way through at this point is down the river. Like they really can't turn back now. They're committed. They either get to the ocean and or they die in the jungle in the Amazon. And they have had to get out, and they've lost some canoes. They've broken on the rocks. They've had some slip away in the night. So far, no one has died in the expedition, but it's been a close run thing a few times. And they are now in the thick of it. So we're going to get back into it. This chapter is entitled Death in the Rapids.
Finally, someone dies. I've been waiting for this. You guys think you've been waiting. I've been waiting.
So things are getting pretty dangerous now. Before we get into the book, if you like what we're doing, you like the show, you want to support us, use the code GRITTY at Mountain Ops. Get yourself some Ignite. Pink lemonade's my favorite. Citrus Bliss. If you're drinking energy drinks, swap them out. Get some Ignite instead. Get some Yeti pre-workout. I like that. I like the Blaze shots. They're like 5-hour energy little shots, but much better ingredients in there. Use the code GRITTY at Mountain Ops for the merino hoodies, merino tops. I use those on all my hunts. I really like their merino hoodies. I wear the green one on pretty much the last 2 years on all my hunts. It's kind of a mainstay. So check out Mountain Ops. They got lots of workout clothes too, which I use every week, running shorts and so on. Use the code GRITTY on everything and you'll save. And also use the code GRITTY over at Peaks. If you don't have a set of trekking poles, I recommend the Peaks poles. They got a carbon fiber upper and an aluminum lower. And you can beat the hell out of them. They last a long time. They're extremely durable and lightweight. They have clip locks instead of screws. They're just everything about them I like. And Peaks is a hunting brand supporting hunters. Check them out. And they came out with a new headlamp called the Backcountry Duo. This is my prototype version of it, actually. I don't even have the new lamp because they're selling out like hotcakes. But a lot of work went into sort of designing the guts and the innards of this, the way it draws power and electricity, being efficient, the light bulbs that were put into this. It's a great headlamp for what we do as hunters. Can't recommend it enough. And then I think the Peaks Gators, I'd give them a run for them up, stack them up against any gator on the market. I think they fit well. They're as durable or more durable than anything else out there. I've put them to the test. So has Ryan Lampers, Stealthy Hunter, and they are a proven quality. They're just a legit gator. So check those out as well. All right, Brent, let's get into the podcast here. Death in the Rapids. Dun, 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 dun. Okay, here we go. We're going to get right into the story here. Gave you the update already. Going to the book. On the morning of March 15, the men awoke with a renewed determination. They had survived a week-long series of raging rapids, one following hard on the heels of another, and they had weathered the loss of 2 canoes. They had built a new dugout, and they had driven it straight through 6 more sets of rapids. They were wet, hungry, and exhausted, but they were hopeful that they could survive just about anything the river had in store for them. Even the river itself seemed to cooperate. When they climbed aboard their canoes at 7 a.m., an unusually early start time for the expedition, the river was so smooth and unchallenging, though still swift, that they were free once again to admire the beauty and complexity of the jungle. This idyllic interlude was heartbreakingly brief. After the expedition had traveled only 3 miles, the land on either side of the river began to rise like an emerging mountain chain, and the men quickly found themselves surrounded by high, boulder-strewn hills. The river still twisted and turned too tightly for them to be able to see far ahead, but they could hear a familiar distant roar.
Oh, no.
I've been there. Like, Ryan and I are using our map system. We'll use, you open up your maps, your online maps, and you're looking through it. Mm-hmm. And they give you so much detail, especially with the, you can look at a satellite image. We've been using Go Hunt maps a lot, and when you get in there, you can zoom in 3D that thing, and then with a satellite image, you can kind of see where the rapids are. Another app that works really well because it gives you a lot more detail. It's clunky; it's not as good in the field, but Gaia is another one where we use the two to try to really pinpoint what's going on in the river. Mm-hmm. And we'll have already mapped out, if we know we're going to float 20 miles out of a spot or 10 miles out of a spot, we'll go, okay, we can really tell that these are areas of danger in the river. Some you can find some rivers online where people have already detailed the rapids and the quality of where the danger spots are on a river. The other thing, though, is you can tell some of that before you go. So we've already mapped out, but we map out where we need to get out of the river, where the trail is going to be for where we're going to go, and then where we get back in the river. Because, like he describes, you can find yourself trapped in a slot canyon. Like, you're going along the river and there's a bank, and then all of a sudden it gets really deep, and all of a sudden you have a 50-foot wall of rock on either side. Now you're going, you can't get out.
You can't climb up
you can't paddle backwards and going down the route. I mean, it's dangerous. It's very, very dangerous, life-threatening. So here they are going down the river, and I can just picture, like, la, 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 the jungle and the bank and everything. And all of a sudden it just keeps getting lower and tighter and tighter. And then there's boulders and rocks and cliffs on either side. And you're going, oh no, oh no. And then you can hear the roar. You get trapped in a slot canyon like that. It's like, very, very dangerous. So, here they are. So we often figure that out. Where does the terrain change? It might be that the rapids are way down here, but the exit point is, half a mile before that, because it drops so fast into those steep holes that you want to get out and hit a side trail so that you're walking at the same elevation around the corner as the river drops. A lot of times these canyon trails are 100 or 200 or even 400 feet above the water, and then they kind of drop down and get back on the bank again later. And so you got to plan not just where the rapids are, but where you're going to get out, hike, and get back in. So they don't have the advantage of maps. Google Earth.
They are the map.
They don't have any of that, so they are hosed. They are the map. Okay, so distant roar. Like the first set of rapids that they had been forced to portage around 2 weeks earlier, this wide stretch of white water was split down the center by a small island. Pushing past the island, the river rushed heavily over a low waterfall. Beyond the waterfall, all they could see was Rondon's words, furious bubblings? That's a weird. Beyond the waterfall, all they could see was Rondon's words, furious bubblings. I don't like that sentence. But you get it. Although they had successfully passed through half a dozen rapids only the day before, Rondon drew the line here. Even with time slipping away and the rations in short supply, they could not risk running these rapids. They would have to make another portage. Rondon quickly ordered his 3 paddlers to pull over to the bank, and he gestured to João and Simplicio, the 2 camaradas who were in the lead canoe with Kermit and his dog, Trigueiro, to do the same. After their boat had been tethered to a tree, Rondon, Lyra, and their prowman, Joaquim, climbed up the muddy bank and set out to find a route for the expedition's portage. With the easy self-assurance of an experienced commander, Rondon strode into the forest-cloaked hills, confident that his orders were being carried out in full.
Good for him.
As Rondon disappeared from sight, Kermit decided to take a chance. Sitting in his cramped dugout as it bumped heavily against the bank, he ordered his paddlers to cross over to the small island that bisected the rapids so that he could see if the right side of the river was more passable than the left. Although the confidence of most of the men in the expedition had been shaken, Kermit's determination to forge ahead was as strong as ever. He had postponed his own life to join this expedition, and he had been frustrated for months by its glacial pace. Young, strong, and skilled at working in the wilderness, he also appeared to be blithely certain of his own ability to survive this journey. It was his aging father's health and safety that concerned him, not his own, and he believed that it was more important to move quickly through the rainforest than to fritter away their time and provisions by being overly cautious. For Kermit, feeling confident in the wilderness was second nature. His father had hammered into him, as well as each of his children from a very young age. So determined was Roosevelt that his children grow up to be strong, fearless adults that he had said that he would rather one of them should die than have them grow up weaklings.
Yeesh.
To ensure that none of them would ever be the kind of weakling he himself had been before he had resolved to make his body, Roosevelt had put his children through frequent and, for some of them, terrifying tests of physical endurance and courage. I think I've done this myself. Most of these tests took place during what came to be known as the Roosevelt household as scrambles, long point-to-point walks led by Roosevelt himself. The only rule during these walks was that the participants could go through, over, or under an obstacle, but never around it. This sounds so fun. Roosevelt and his children, as well as a revolving crowd of cousins and friends, would not turn aside for anything, Ted Jr. would later write. If a haystack was in the way, we either climbed over it or burrowed through it. If we came to a pond, we swam across.
Good for them.
Roosevelt used these scrambles, as well as other separate excursions, to attack his children's wilderness fears, which he referred to as buck fever, a state of intense nervous excitement, which may be entirely divorced from timidity. Even the most courageous man, he believed, when confronted by real danger in the wilderness, whether it be an angry lion or a roaring river, could suffer from buck fever. What such a man needs is not courage, but nerve control, cool-headedness, he explained. This he can only get by actual practice. Roosevelt's children never suffered from a lack of opportunity to master their buck fever. On one occasion, their father found a big hollow tree that had a wide opening 20 feet up. Perfect, he thought, for dangling small children in.
Perfect. My first thought. That's a good dangling tree.
With much labor, I got up the tree, Roosevelt proudly wrote to his sister Bamie, and let each child in turn down the hollow by a rope. His method for teaching his children to swim was not much gentler.
Hold up. Where's Mrs. Roosevelt at this time? How does she feel about this?
I'm sure she was like, all
Good
in
job,
favor.
honey.
Yeah,
I'm sure she was all on board.
Let's make strong children. He took them to a dock and ordered them to leap into the deep water. His oldest child, Alice, was particularly frightened of diving, but her father was not about to let her off the hook. He would shout, "Dive, Alice, now! Dive!" until finally, trembling with fear, she would launch her tiny body into the cold, dark water. Kermit, although he was always a sober little boy and less demonstrative than his siblings. Demonstrative? Yes. Than his siblings, he worked as hard as any of them to please his father and prove himself. There was never any question that he had been paying attention during his childhood scrambles across Oyster Bay. The problem was that Roosevelt's lessons in manliness may have struck too deep a chord in his second son. Kermit had become almost too fearless and certainly too reckless for even his father's comfort. Although Roosevelt was proud of his son's physical strength and courage, he worried that Kermit's thirst for adventure was ungoverned by the kind of wisdom that comes with age, and untempered by even a small measure of caution.
Sounds like he went a little too far in the course correction there.
Yeah. Where courage overrides wisdom.
Mm-hmm. I've never been there.
Roosevelt's letters home from Africa had been filled with stories of Kermit's utter disregard for danger and his own incessant fretting. To his sister Corinne, he had written, "Kermit is a great pleasure to me and, of course, often a cause of much concern. Do you remember how timid he used to be? Well, my trouble with him now is that he is altogether too bold, pushing daring into recklessness." Kermit had faced down charging lions, elephants, and rhinoceroses in Africa. He had disappeared into the bush for 2 months with one of their guides and returned, Roosevelt wrote, a better hunter than I am. But Roosevelt knew that all of his son's courage and skill could not save him if he continued to act carelessly. "Since I have been out here, 12 men have been killed or mauled by lions," he had written Corinne. "And naturally, when Kermit shows a reckless indifference to consequences when hunting them, I feel like beating him."
Good dad. You know,
dude, I think a few beatings are in order. And
a few.
The problem with the world today is not enough kids are beat. I'll just get on the soapbox here. I remember listening to Dave Ramsey, and he was talking about going to the grocery store. Mm-hmm. And it was in like Financial Peace University or something, one of the DVDs I had back in the day. And he was giving a lecture on one of the concepts, and the kid was in the grocery store, and he said, he said that his kid was in the grocery store and just started screaming because they wanted something. And he said, "No, you cannot have that." And he promptly took the kid out of the store and whooped him. And he said, "Now, some of you in the audience are not comfortable with the fact that I beat my kid for their behavior in this grocery store. But you are what's wrong with America today." And I was like, aye. Absolutely. We didn't have some of the problems we have today because kids actually had consequences for bad behavior. Now I see parents just let kids just go off and they do nothing but this passive, let them cry, blah, blah, blah. My mom always did this. Our mother did this. She was like, when a kid throws a fit, 2, 3, 4 years old, it's emotional. They can't even stop themselves. They don't have the discipline to do it. It's a reaction to what they are not getting. They're upset. So the initial outburst is to be expected and not going to be very, they don't have the ability to deal with the frustration that they're experiencing. So there's this outburst. But it quickly, over a minute or two, becomes not an outburst anymore, but just an angry, bitter rant because they're not getting what they want. She was very good at recognizing when the transition had taken place.
Yeah.
You were not allowed to do the second part.
No.
You could have the first part. So I learned, with young kids, often what she said was, well, I remove the audience. Mm-hmm. A lot of this carrying on and I want this, and all that is, to make the mother or the parent cave in. Mm-hmm. And so she just simply put you in the room and shut the door and left you. And if you came out, you got beat. So you stayed in the room, and when you were in the room,
there were rules. There was rules.
If you were in the room carrying on, it didn't do you much good because
no one's there.
No one was there. So you're like, man, I need an audience for this behavior. And you kind of didn't bother with it because it didn't really serve your purposes much. And you learn pretty quick that it really didn't get you anywhere. And so you quit doing it. So you might have an emotional outburst as a 4-year-old or whatever, or 5 or even 3. But in our house, that lasted, you got some grace for a moment. And then you had to suck it up, or there was going to be a consequence. And you just weren't allowed to just be rebellious and carry on.
I like how The way this is phrased, he had disappeared into the bush for 2 months with one of their guides. Was there not a conversation beforehand, or did he just into the bush? Because I could see it going both ways. Him saying, "Hey, you take my kid out into the woods for 2 months,"
and then they just start,
or Kermit just said, "Peace," and just.
I picture Lampers doing that, like going out and then being like, just staying.
This is good.
Just
this
staying.
Is good.
Another week, like not even paying attention to time, just out there, and then being like, oh, I should probably get back. You know,
it's been 6 weeks.
Yeah, and his wife Hillary's like, a little communication, maybe, and he's like, what communication?
I was fine,
but yeah. No, I see. I totally agree with you. Who knows which way it went? It doesn't really say in the book. But yeah, he felt like beating him when he was not careful.
That's the thing. If he walked out into the woods without a conversation, that's a signing up for a whooping.
Look, I've had some periods where my kids do something dangerous. Like I remember when Ben and I decided, because I don't remember how 12 or 14, 13. I don't know. We decided we were going to swim across a lake. Because
why not?
Why not? And this lake was like a mile or two across. Like it was, I mean, it was like way across. And we're like, yeah, let's swim across. It'll take half the day. And then we'll swim back. Now, there's speedboats every now and then going through the lake, water skiers or whatever.
You gotta pay attention.
There's just things. And we didn't bring a life jacket or any floaties or... we just were confident that we could swim across, go hang out over there, and then swim back. We did it to do it. So we swam across, and which was fine. We were fine. And then Carrie, my sister Carrie, and Ben's sister Mandy decided that when we were about halfway across that they were going to do it too because they copied us. So they put one of those. They got this. What was it? The Fun Island or something? You could buy it at Costco. It was this inflatable island thing. Well, it had like 5 holes in it. So these two girls, they start paddling across on this floating thing that has a hole in it. And they're about halfway across, and they're younger than us, or Carrie is anyway. And the thing starts sinking. And she has no business being out in the middle of this lake. And it starts going down, down, down. And then she's screaming. And Ben and I have swum across. And we're like, oh. So we have to swim out and save their butts, and then swim them across. Well, now they have
they lost the Fun Island.
Yes, and our parents are like, now Ben and I are like, how do we get our sisters over there? Our parents finally figured out they came and got us in the boat, and me and Ben, we were in so much trouble, and we were like, look. None of this would have been a problem if our sisters hadn't tried to do what we did. And it didn't stop us. We went swimming across lots of lakes after that, and just to swim from one side to the other, just to see if you could do it. There's something about being out there in the middle of nowhere and you have no choice. You just have to make it or you die in the lake, But it wasn't I could swim all day, but, It kind of reminds me of that. So, where were we? Tangent.
Here. Beating him.
Feels like beating him. So I was going to say, our parents felt like beating us for swimming across the thing with no life jackets and nothing inflatable and not telling anyone and having no safety net or any backup plan. Now, on the River of Doubt, back to the book, Roosevelt's old fears for his son's safety had returned with a vengeance, and he winced every time Kermit climbed into his dugout to set off ahead of the rest of the expedition. Roosevelt wrote that Kermit was a great comfort and help to him in this expedition, but he admitted that he could never completely relax while his son pushed along on the unknown river so far ahead of him. The fear of some fatal accident befalling him, he wrote, was always a nightmare to me. Although Roosevelt had long lectured Kermit about his recklessness, his advice appeared to have little effect on his son's actions. It certainly did not have an effect that afternoon on the River of Doubt, as he ordered his paddlers to carry him to the island and arrested in the center of the rapids. So if you can picture this, there's an island in the middle of all these kind of rapids. Now they're mild, right? But beyond the island, it just gets nasty, deadly. And his idea is, let's just motor out to that island, and then I can walk across and see if the right-hand side of the rapids we can just float through, rather than, having to go all the way down the river, and you may not be able to see on the other side of the island anyway. So he's just kind of hoping that if he can get to the island and look over, it'll be fine. And so he gets his crew to paddle him out there. So go back to the book. It says, although Roosevelt had long lectured him about his recklessness, I read that. The three men successfully rode the current downstream and halfway across the river to the island. As soon as they disembarked, however, they realized that Rondon was right. There was no safe channel on either side of the river. So they got to the island, they looked down there, and where it splits, there's nothing you can do.
So they got to make it the portage road?
Well, here's the problem. Now they were only stranded. Now they were not only stranded on the island, they were farther down the river than they had been before, and closer to the waterfall, the thundering waterfall. So Kermit ordered the camaradas to board the dugout and cross back to the left bank where they had come from. But you're in the rapids above the waterfall, and now your row time to get from the island back is pretty short because you're getting closer and closer to the waterfall, right? It was one thing to get to the island. Now it's another thing to get back away from the island. That calculus probably should have been done before you rode out to the island. Okay? So Kermit ordered the camaradas to board and cross back to the left bank. Both João and Simplicio, Roosevelt wrote, were exceptionally good men in every way, but they balked at the command. Kermit had to repeat his order before they reluctantly dug their paddles into the rushing river. I mean, they were looking at it going, this isn't going to work, dude. What's your plan exactly? This is, I'm sure, I don't know exactly what it looked like, but I don't know what else they were going to do either. Like, how are you going to maybe rope? I don't know how much they had. I don't know. The three men were on their journey back when the canoe was suddenly struck by one of the shifting whirlpools that they had seen the day before. The vortex spun them around, and as Kermit shouted to his steersman to turn the dugout so that it would take the inevitable blow head-on rather than broadside, it forced them over the waterfall.
Uh-oh.
Incredibly, when they reached the bottom, their small canoe, which Roosevelt explained was the least seaworthy of all, was still upright. However, it had taken in so much water it could hardly float. Realizing that their only chance for survival was to make it to the shore, João and Simplicio paddled as fast and as hard as they could. They had just pulled themselves to within grasping distance of the bank when another whirlpool sucked them in and spat them back out into the middle of the river.
I'll be so mad.
Fighting to save not just his companions, but their crude canoe, João leaped into the river. I don't know how you say that name.
I don't know.
I'm calling him João or Wah. Or
that is João.
He leapt into the water and desperately grabbed a hawser that had been tied to the bow.
That's one of the branchers. That's one of the branches, isn't it? That they used to buoy them?
Maybe. Or a rope.
Yeah, straining against the rope, yeah.
Yeah, he says, straining against the rope, he tried to drag the dugout back to the bank as he slipped and stumbled over the riverbed. The current, however, was too strong for him. It quickly ripped the hawser out of his hands, the rope, flipped the canoe over, and hurled it downstream. The last thing that João saw as the dugout swirled out of sight was Simplicio and Kermit clinging to its splintered, capsized hull. From their canoe above the rapids, Roosevelt and Cherry had watched in horror as Kermit, João, and Simplicio struggled to maintain control of their dugout and then disappeared over the waterfall. Shouting to their paddlers to pull over, they had scrambled out of their canoe and raced along the uneven bank until they reached the bottom of a second waterfall. What they saw there would have stopped any father's heart. Kermit's dugout lay among the rocks, as Cherry would later write, crushed to splinters. Dun, 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 dun.
Oh, part 4. Iron cruelty.
Iron cruelty. Attack. Yeah. So I think we're going to have to look. All right. I'm not going to leave people hanging exactly.
Let's do like the next page and a half.
We're going to get through this little bit so you all kind of know about death in the rapids. As his father strained desperately to catch a glimpse of him in the roiling water, Kermit fought for his life downstream. When his dugout was swept over the second waterfall, the impact had crushed the boat and hurled Kermit, Simplicio, and Kermit's dog into the water. Kermit was still alive and conscious, but his battle with the river was only beginning. His favorite rifle, the .405 Winchester he had carried in Africa, was knocked from his hands, and the rushing water blinded, choked, and pummeled him. Like a relentless hammer, the torrent drove his broad, hard sun helmet over his face and forced his body down to the jagged river bed.
Oh, so it's acting like a reverse parachute, and it's sucking him face first down to the bottom.
His waterlogged jacket became an anchor, dragging him to the bottom of the river. Would you be wearing a sun helmet?
It's sunny in the Amazon.
I guess so.
You know?
So this thing,
I think the sun helmet, if you think about those African safari type hats, that's what I'm imagining.
Came over his face and caught water okay. So either way, he was getting dragged to the bottom of the river. Somewhere in the middle of the raging rapids, Simplicio was also being propelled through layers of white foam and black water. The powerful rushing water and deadly whirlpools created by the rocky riverbed swept him violently downstream, threatening at any moment to pull him under long enough for his life, in Roosevelt's words, to be beaten out on the boulders beneath the racing torrent. While Kermit and Simplicio struggled in the river, Rondon was walking back along its left bank, unaware of their plight, having found the portage route that he was looking for. As he approached his canoe, preoccupied with his orders for the camaradas, he was suddenly startled by what he saw, or rather did not see, in front of him. He had expected to find Kermit's dugout tied to a tree alongside his own. Turning to his pilot, a well-respected camarada named Antonio Correa, Rondon demanded to know what had happened after he left. He listened in astonishment as Antonio told him that Kermit had blatantly disobeyed his command. Right? Like, he's sitting there going,
he can't even fathom what happened.
Stupid teenager. Like,
Uh-huh.
Like, are you kidding me?
Are you dumb?
Yeah. Yeah. And the answer is yes and yes. Furious and worried that Kermit had put his boat and its precious provisions at risk, Rondon turned and hurried with Lyra toward the falls. In the distance, the two men caught sight of Kermit's dog, Trigueiro, running toward them. The closer the dog approached, the greater Rondon's concern became, and the faster he began to walk, until he and Lyra were practically running along the river's edge. By the time they reached Trigueiro, it was obvious to both men that the dog had been thrown into the river. The dog was soaking wet. More ominously, he was alone. Rushing past the dog, Rondon and Lyra raced to the bottom of the first waterfall. As they approached the crest of the small hill, they saw a lone figure climbing toward them on the other side. It was Kermit, drenched, battered, and weak with exhaustion, but alive. Rondon's first reaction was overwhelming relief. His relief, however, quickly gave way to anger. Rondon was not accustomed to being disobeyed, even by the son of a former president of the United States. By refusing to listen to him, Kermit had endangered the entire expedition. When Kermit was finally standing before him, Rondon's rage boiled over into sarcasm. "Well," he said caustically, "you have had a splendid bath, eh?" Standing on the narrow, muddy trail, water running in rivulets down his pants and pooling at his feet, Kermit tried to explain what had happened to him, and, he believed, João and Simplicio. After he was driven to the bottom of the river by the rapids, a back current had carried him to a stretch of swift but calm water. Almost drowned, his breath and strength almost spent, he had spotted an overhanging branch and recognized it as his best and probably last chance for survival. Grabbing the branch, he had hauled himself out of the river. Trigueiro, who had been by Kermit's side throughout the ordeal, scrambled up the bank next to his master as he collapsed on the shore. João and Simplicio, Kermit now told Rondon, must have swum to the safety on the other side of the river, but he did not know what had happened to his canoe or its contents.
He's making an assumption about those two.
Accepting Kermit's assumption that everyone was probably safe, Rondon and Lyra focused their attention on the problem of portaging around the second waterfall, which they had not even known existed until they had heard Kermit's story. In searching for his canoe and any provisions, that was the other thing they did, that might have survived the rapids. As valuable as the canoe itself as valuable as the canoe itself was, the cargo that it had been carrying, essential boat building tools, as well as 10 days worth of rations, the loss of which would be devastating. No sooner had Kermit walked away, however, than Zhao appeared before Rondon and Lyra. As Kermit had guessed, Zhao had emerged from the river on the other side and had somehow managed to make his way back across, but he had not seen Simplicio since the Camarado had disappeared over the second waterfall with Kermit. Rondon ordered an immediate manhunt. It was, he wrote, their one hope left. After a frantic search, which extended about a mile downstream, however, the men were able to recover nothing more than a battered paddle and a single box of rations. It was clear to them all what had happened. Unfortunately, the moment arrived when it was impossible to deceive ourselves, Rondon wrote. Simplicio was drowned.
Dang it. So they lost 9 boxes of rations and then all of their food, and he got a guy killed.
Yep. All to that's where these things, when I'm out there with Ryan and we're in some dangerous places, you ask yourself, how does someone die, or how does something go tragically wrong? It's just a simple, tiny decision. Like, this isn't a big decision. Like, I'm just going to cruise out to that island, take a quick look, and come back.
Sounds harmless.
Yeah, it seems pretty basic, but he didn't really weigh all the possibilities. Like, worst case scenario, can I live with that? He probably didn't even consider it. He was just in a hurry. He just wanted to get there, get it done, get it figured out. And had he really been like, okay, this could end this way. I could lose a couple people's lives, all these provisions, and the canoe. Can I live with that? No. And that's where you start being more conservative. You start making better decisions in the mountains, in the wilderness. You start saying, okay, can I live with, like, crossing a log with a heavy backpack on that's slick and slimy, that if you fall in, you drown downriver, or you fall, or you get wet, or like, what's the worst case that'll probably happen here, that could happen here? Is it worth that risk? And you start making better choices. You can look at just about every tragic situation, and it was a minor decision. Like, I'm going to walk, rather than, tie off right here on this little section of trail. It's only 6 feet. I'm just going to shimmy across it and I'll be done. It looks super stable. And, if I slip, I'll slide 100 yards and fall off a 500-foot drop. But this is like a 3 foot wide, and there's no way I could slip. And so you make these decisions like.
That story sounded oddly specific, Brian.
I'm not saying I've made the best choices, but in hindsight, I make better ones all the time. I think it's important to recognize, like, the situations you've been in where you're like, okay, I got lucky. The things could have gone really badly here, and they didn't. And that's not that's not as some sort of tribute to myself. I just got lucky. Recognize that and start adjusting, making better decisions. Anyway, that's the tragedy here. Analyzing what all the potential downsides are. It's like when we were talking about rafting the river in the little alpaca rafts and going, okay, what's the worst that could happen here? Oh, I could die. I could drown on this stretch of rapids. Not likely. I mean, I'm pretty good, but this is not, you fall in there. There's a potential that you could get sucked in a whirlpool and then drown. Is that worth it? No, it's only going to take me an extra hour to get out, portage around it, and then that you rule out that entire possibility. What's the worst? If you portage it, well, it takes me an extra hour to get to where I want to be, or I might get out of the bush tomorrow instead of today. Mm-hmm. That's a much better outcome to live with than the other. And so you start making smarter, more wiser decisions, So, all right, that's it for today. We're going to get into this next part. It's called the attack, and this is where it gets real interesting. It's getting more and more harrowing with every turn of the page. So stay tuned for that. Before we go, if you like the show and you like what we're doing here, go use the code GRITTY at Stealthy Nutrition if you're in need of some CBD oil. I particularly like the gummies. Get yourself a Stealthy Hunter rifle cover, a Stealthy Hunter glassing pad, And
Is that what we call them, glassing pads, not butt pads?
yeah, it's just less like a butt pad is,
Sounds like a feminine product.
yeah, it sounds like a lot of things, so glassing
Sounds
pad.
like an insult. You butt pad.
Yeah. So use the code GRIDDY over there. Do us a favor and use the code GRIDDY at Initial Ascent if you're in need of a backpack and you're shopping. That's another great place. And everybody needs a dark energy battery pack. If you don't have one, battery bank for the outdoors, use the code GRIDDY over at Dark Energy and you will save. And everybody needs one of those. I might as well throw out there, we've been using this Anchor PowerPort solar. We probably have sold a ton of these. They're like $60. They're not much.
Oh, that's not bad.
Yeah, not at all. It's a 3-panel PowerPort solar panel that we've been using with the Dark Energy battery bank. It's kind of my favorite go-to setup. And you have unlimited power. I used to not like these solar panels because they just didn't get the job done back in the day. They were too heavy and they didn't really charge anything. This little monster is 14 ounces and charges like a beast. And you kind of have unlimited electricity. I think the days of carrying tons of power banks are over. Sorry, Dark Energy. But
you still take one.
You need at least one.
Yeah.
And that's the one I'd recommend. And then I'd check this out here. So that's it for today. Thank you for tuning in. Anything left, Brent? Anything else to go?
Stay gritty.
Stay gritty. Remember, there's more to life than money.